Okay. Welcome to the special workshop session of the planning board for the Iron Star application. I'm going to move to dispense with the minutes, the approval of previous minutes for the next regular meeting. Doing that now. They just disappeared. Yeah, maybe. Can't say I blame you. Jay, anything in the way of our correspondence?
Obviously the consultant memos came in. They were placed in the small conference room and distributed board members by email.
Conflict check. Anyone have any conflicts with tonight's application? Okay, if not, then we will go right into the agenda for Iron Star. The purpose of this meeting is a board workshop. It's for the board to gather information from our consultants. We've had a presentation from the applicant at this point. We're going to have our consultants provide their comments to us. We will be able to discuss that with the consultants. And following that, then we will have a discussion amongst ourselves about any questions that we may have as to what's going on. And we can ask that of obviously our consultants and if we need to the applicant. Do that. Okay, so Nan, you're up.
I'm up, okay. So I think everyone got a copy, did the memo get sent out? Okay, so I'm not gonna go over every single one, but I just wanted to highlight some of the major pieces. So I kind of looked at, organized it into just some, in comparison to what the zoning law says are requirements that need, features that need to be on the site plan. So there's kind of a set of relatively minor deficiencies and things that should be on the site plan, but that I think are important to be included on the site plan to give you guys all of the information that you need in order to evaluate this. So some of the things that that are required as are articulated in the zoning, but not included in the plan. Some of the things that I pulled out from the long list that's in here, the names and identification of the adjacent landowners across from Route 82 were not on there. And I think given that's where there are dwellings across the street, that we need to see those on the site plan so you can evaluate things in relationship to those. The zoning requires the agricultural data statement, which is a list, I'm sure you've gotten it for other applications. It's a list of other names in the ag district that need to be notified as the process moves forward. So the ag data statement needs to be included. And some other things like the sizes of the proposed structures were not included on the site plan. The drawings for some of the structures had the dimensions that you could get from it, but they should be on the actual site plan itself, so you can easily see what those are. So the other thing that I commented on is the lighting plan. The site plan does have some of the lighting features. It showed the locations where there would be lights, for instance, in the parking area. It showed the bollard lighting along the pathways. It had illustrations of the lighting fixture, which there was a little bit of mismatch between the text of the site plan said 14 feet high, but the drawing was 12 feet high. So just some little things like that. But the lighting plan that we typically get from applications in order to evaluate the impact of lighting shows foot candles, and so it basically shows the spread of the lights as you go out. And so I forget what sheet it was, one of the last sheets had a general illustration of foot candles from around the light, but it wasn't drawn to scale. And we usually look at, when we have a commercial development, we usually look at a lighting plan that actually figures out the foot candles from all the lights. So you can look at where it is when it gets to the boundary, the property boundaries, so you can tell what the glare may or may not be. So I think that was something that the plan alludes to, because it has this generic foot candle drawing, but we don't know where that is or how that relates to where the boundaries are. Some other things, really going back to comments that were previously made about fire lanes, emergency zones, emergency access, those types of things needed to be articulated on the map. The main sign, the main entrance sign, there was a picture, but no location that I could find, at least on the site plan, showing where that sign would actually go. And some minor things, like there were things that are shown on the site plan, but not in the legend. So when you try and look, what does this symbol mean? And it's not in the legend, that just makes it harder to figure out what some of those maps are pretty busy. So having a really complete legend is really important. So there's kind of a series of these small deficiencies that I think, though, are not only required, but they add a lot of information that you need to help as you go along. So you can look at the memo and see that some of them are organized around those types of things. Then kind of moving up in a level of things that I think were either an update that was needed, or something that was incomplete, or an error on the site plan. Some of them minor, like the site plan has an arrow with a label that says a 6-car parking lot, and it's pointing to the patio instead of the parking lot. Those are minor things that can be cleaned up, but they're an example of kind of a series of these that need to be looked at. I feel that the one thing the planning board should really look at is the existing conditions map. I think can be improved a lot. I think that's a really important map to help everybody learn what's there now. That's its purpose, is so that everyone understands what's there. And other sheets have some of the information, but all of that information should be carried over onto the existing conditions map. I think that it doesn't have the elevation numbers. It has the topographic lines, but not the elevation, the actual numbers that are at least that are easily discernible. And it would be really nice to have the existing conditions map laid over an aerial photo, so that you can see, you don't necessarily need to follow the lines, the illustration lines. You can see where the woodland is and the hedgerows. And so I think that would be really helpful if the existing conditions map was a much more comprehensive map. That it's not that they don't have that data, they can pull that data from other sheets. They do show where the woods are. There are some things that are not labeled, but I think that existing conditions map is a must to really understand then what they're proposing based on what's there on the ground. So I had some issues with that. So then I brought up some questions and concerns that I think that I would recommend the planning board think about. They're proposing, for instance, a 22-car lot for the inn and restaurant use. And for those of you who've worked with me in the ZRC, I'm not a big fan of big parking lots, and I will always try and limit the size of parking lots. But we also want to make sure it's adequate. And I just want to. It just seemed for an inn and a restaurant with having only 4 employees and seating for 40, That if you add up 5 bedrooms in 4, more than maybe 4 employees, if the restaurant had fully used by non-retreat patrons, that there might be need for more. So that's something that we can talk about. And George and I talked about, and I'm sure he'll bring it up too, it's unclear if the interior circulation is a road or a driveway. And that matters because Ancrum has highway standards and we have to figure out if they meet a road standard or a driveway standard. So I think that's a topic of conversation that we need to look at. There were some features of the infrastructure such as the septic and the stormwater basins that didn't seem to be the right setback from the property lines. And the other thing that I observed was that there's the stormwater, you'll bring this up, I'm sure, the stormwater basin or the infiltration basin was in the right of way, the DOT right of way along Route 82. I don't know, George will talk about that more, but the tents that were labeled number 6 and 8 also were not 100 feet from the property line, and I'm measuring that from the lot 4, which is still a separate lot. So the way I look at that is that each one of those structures is part of the principal use. So the tents, the cabins, the inn, they're all part of the whole. So they're all part of the principal uses, and those are supposed to be 100 feet from the property line. So there were some instances where I thought that there was some setback issues. The site plan had some disconnects. The A-frame labeled 3 and the tents labeled 6, 7, and 8 didn't have the dotted lines that showed the trail linking it to the other pathways. Again, these are just very picky minor things, some of these, but we want to make sure we know, we have all of these answered to clearly understand what was going on. One of the things that I talked to George a little bit about, and I hope we can have a discussion about that. The infrastructure shows the water and the septic hookups to each of the 10 campsites, but I just need more explanation on how a tent, like a platform, has water and septic. Is it going to be in the tent? Is it going to be a separate building? I don't know. I just don't know how to answer that question. So I think that's an issue that we need to, that are a site planning kind of issue. But then I have like a series of other questions and observations that were not really discussed. They're not necessarily a site plan issue, but it's more about the operation of the facility. Just wondering whether there will be any events that will be taking place that will bring people coming in that are not resident or not users of the camp, the cabin or the A-frames or the inn, or will there be, a wedding or something big at the restaurant that will bring in traffic that we haven't, or need for car parking that we haven't accommodated. The other lots that are owned by the applicant, lots 1, 2, and 4 are shown on the site plan. I don't know what's happening on those. The application said no aspects of this project are on those other lots, but I just want to make sure we're not segmenting out a review of something that is going to come down the pike in the future that we should consider now. I had questions about the one-way in and one-way out nature of the driveway or road. And the neck down, like if you look carefully at the site plan, you'll see that it gets narrowed. I don't know why that is. And it seems like an awkward circulation pattern to go one way in from all the way around to get to the restaurant. I don't know if that's site distances or what. I have continued concerns, as I mentioned, about the emergency access and concern about still having just pedestrian pathways to each of the lodging places. That there's parking lots and there's roads that are not too far away, but I think this is where we get the fire department and the emergency services to really look at that and let us know whether that is doable or not. And then there's quite a bit in my memo about the landscaping. I went kind of into detail on the proposed landscaping plan, which I have made many comments on. I think that, I don't know, John, if you want to get into the nitty gritty of those details, or if you just like a broad statement that I think there could be many improvements made.
Mhm.
I'm not, I guess insecure, I would say, about whether the plan, while it has diverse, it has meadows, it has forest areas, it has shrub areas, but I'm not sure it's effectively screening, and that's a big need in that particular location, screening from 82. And so I had quite a few details about the concerns that I have about, concerns and questions that I have about the landscaping plan. So if when we get into it, if you want to go into more detail at some point, we can. I don't want to take away from George and his comments. So that's, kind of a highlight of the memo that I submitted, and we can talk about, any of those details.
Okay. Any questions for Nan? Okay, George?
Do we want to go through things?
Yeah,
now,
like,
or-
whatever, if you've got questions that, relate to what Nan's comments are, we should address that now, and then we can go on to George, and then we're gonna.
All right, yeah, the more general, I guess, things about other details and other things, so it's like, I'd have a list too, so.
Okay.
And what constitutes a permanent structure?
I'm sorry, what?
What constitutes a permanent structure? Because of that and then not, I mean,
You mean, are you talking about like the tent platforms?
yeah.
From a zoning perspective or an engineering perspective?
don't.
And we don't really understand how in other words, the water and sewer facilities,
I mean,
exactly what the structure of those is within those. Within the structures.
right,
It's a good question.
Right,
That
yeah.
You might need more information.
Yeah.
Of course, the zoning definition, which I don't have memorized, but that would be the first place I would look. If it's not defined, it would fall to what is customarily used and defined in the industry. So bringing water and sewer to something kind of makes it permanent. The platform that most likely is a foundation or something holding it there. Even if it's just posts on the ground. It's kind of permanent, right?
I mean, some things in zoning, when they're called temporary, like a temporary sign, it's out for 30 days or 45 days, and then it's completely removed. I'm trying to think of-
Easily.
Yeah, easily
Like
removed.
anything, you can
Yeah.
remove. I could demo
Yeah.
a house,
Right,
fill it
I
in
mean, it may
with
not be
grass, and
important,
say,
but
look, it looks great now.
I was just wondering.
It for sure was a permanent structure.
Yeah.
Before I decided to take it down.
Karen, did you have anything else? for-
Well, I guess this whole thing that it's just incomplete. It's- there's so many things missing, and it's an incomplete package. I mean, I know there's, all of us had items that were, it was a lot about things that are missing. We don't have information. And I guess I'm just not sure where we are in this review process, that we're just gonna go through all this stuff again, or just give them lists to, we gotta talk about broader ideas
Yeah.
when we get to. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's a good question. How does this fit into the larger picture? And we can talk about that a little bit later.
Okay,
Because that's very germane to the immediate next step, which is two of the environmental assessment form.
This may be a stupid question, but are we requiring them to apply for 2 special use permits? Because these are 2 separate, you have in motel, hotel, has its own regulations, whereas campground has its other set of regulations, or are we just kind of merging them all together?
I think that's something we have to shake out because we've had a full discussion about that. And because it's a mixed use,
Right.
it's
Well,
gonna,
there's a restaurant too. There's a restaurant, which, yeah,
so that's gonna shake out as we go down through this. And I think a lot of that may play out in the EAF in part two as well.
Yeah, and we'll take a look. My immediate, we haven't come to the end of the inquiry on that question, but Kim and I took a preliminary look at that question and our take, just based on so your definition of retreat center encompasses many different elements. And right now, as we see it, what's being proposed does sufficiently meet the definition of retreat center as it's defined in the zoning law. And all these pieces that are components of that will come under the special use permit for the retreat center. And then you have a set of, so you have your general special use permit requirements that need to be met. And then there's a separate set for the retreat center. So that's where we are on that issue at the moment.
Now, let me go to the mixed use building. We talked about the parking lot. And I looked at the building and I've asked for, and I hope we can get existing drawings of the existing buildings that are dimensioned to scale. I don't know what's going on, but how it becomes this building with the restaurant and 4 rooms or 5 rooms. It's all flat to the ground, so I don't know what the finished floor grades are. There's a lot of information that, you know, I don't even know how you get around to the handicap room because it kind of falls off and you got to cut through the patio or something. But back to the parking. The chart shows a 600 square foot restaurant. Well, if you take and scale the area, and my drawings, the restaurant fell off the sheet. So I went back to the older drawings. The restaurant area under the room scales 27 by 52, which is 1,400 feet. So rule of thumb, you take 25% out for the kitchen, it's still more than a 600 square foot restaurant. So I don't know where the 600 feet comes from, which determines the parking, but it doesn't determine the occupancy. The occupancy is determined by the building code, which is divided by 1 for 15 square feet. So the numbers don't make sense. The parking requirement obviously doesn't make sense. So it needs to be cleaned up. And just a little tip, you have more than 19 seats, the state health code requires men's and women's room. If you serve alcohol, you're required to have a men's and women's room. So there's only 1 restroom in the facility for general use. And it doesn't even comply with the handicap requirements, be that as it may. So I think you got to clean up the whole chart. I don't know what we're building, can't tell, but if I scale the drawings, it's far larger than what the chart is showing. So that's a problem because if we're concerned about parking. And the other thing too, outdoor dining could double your capacity, which also can increase your parking requirements. So I don't know if we're going to be having outside dining. The patio is far bigger than the restaurant. So I'm concerned about that. So also, I think, and Ed's here, and maybe Ed's looked into it. Everything on this site is a transient occupancy. These little buildings are not ducks. They don't quack, walk, or talk and make them a single family home. These are hotel rooms, and hotel rooms have a whole different set of requirements. They're not in the residential code, they're in the building code. So there's a big discrepancy there in my mind. One, all transient R1 occupancies have to be sprinkled. There's no way around it. What the code says. They need to be accessible. That's what the code says. Chapter 11 and ANSI and ADA. So I see a lot of things that in my mind need to be addressed. I don't know, Ed, if you've looked into the the use, if you're comfortable with it.
I have not looked into it, yeah.
Okay. I mean,
There's a lot of details there that he's talking about that, and looking at that I haven't looked at yet.
okay, well, I think unfortunately, the whole site plan, in my mind, has to be reviewed based on what the use is. And if these are hotel rooms, they're not single-family homes, it's a whole different level of scrutiny. So I think we have to get to that. We can hire, if you're not comfortable, Ed, state will help us, you can send them up the stuff, they'll look at it and give us a ruling what it is. I couldn't find an exception that if you take a hotel room and put it in a little building, does it not become a hotel room? It's a transient occupancy based on the length of stay. Has nothing to do with the shape of the structure. That's the way I see it. So they can get a variance. They could say, hey, it doesn't require sprinklers. They can go to state and get a variance if I'm right, and they don't want to do it. But until we get a determination, I think we got a lot of questions that need to be answered. That's my spiel for that section.
Thanks, Joe.
I have one other thing.
Come in.
I was looking at the kind of the roadway plan, and I certainly agree with you, Ian, that the fire company needs to be, and EMS needs to definitely be involved in this, because some of the turnarounds and things like that are a little questionable. But I noticed, now this is a pre-existing condition where they're planning to exit the property, is currently like a driveway, if I'm not mistaken. But it falls within the buffer of the stream. It falls within the 150 foot.
At the corner, right?
At the corner, right, where it goes on to 82. And as a driveway, that's a little bit less impacted, but when you're talking about the traffic of this retreat center in that area, it could really become an impact in the wetlands. So that might be another consideration. Maybe they want to reroute things a little differently.
Thanks. Anyone else? Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
She's storing it all.
All right, George.
All right. Well, I have a lot of the same, general concerns that Amber touched on. The big one, of course, I'll just say it again, I think he's bringing it up, fire, EMS, we do need to bring them into this discussion. Similar to the uses that Joe had and that John was talking about, I in my memo, you saw I broke it out into different uses, but I wasn't sure what are the uses, depending on what it is. And how the board, everyone, defines it. You have different setbacks, different site plan review criteria. If it is all one thing, then like man was pointing out, they're all principal buildings, they all have to conform to the 100 setback. Mixed use, and we're doing it under different things, we have different. So I kind of just pointed that out because that's something that I think the board does need to discuss and just get an answer so that everything moves forward, kind of in a streamlined fashion. On-site sewage systems obviously will be reviewed and permitted probably by DEC, from the county health department, but we need a lot more details, correspondence from those agencies. There was something I saw in there that mentioned laundry. Yeah. Again, it's not that it can't happen, but that will raise some concerns with the health department and DEC about the laundry and that going. It's not the same as just sewage. Specifically, I guess, looking at that and just knowing it didn't meet agita on many of my own private designs. I know there's been a lot of questions and concerns in regards to the aquifer, the water, and so it's going to kick all that kind of review up a little bit higher on the interest level for those agencies. Potable water seems like their current plan is only to do part 5 for the inn restaurant building. Again, if it's all one use and all being looked at as one use, then I would say the entire thing, potable water supply. Hence, the other structures, everybody's not just.
Should be a community water supply.
For the whole thing, all meaning part 5, not just the building. was a big deal. The other thing that I was, raising, one of the things I raised was about, subdivision regulations in the town, whether or not this would be approvable by this board, having either a driveway or a road, whatever we want to classify and come to agreement on with these structures, which could, no matter what they seem like today, could become single family in the future. Again, if that's something this board would allow or approve, if it's not, then we really want to talk about that and have some sort of language in place that this is not going to be subdivided at any point where these become standalone lots or anything of that nature. Something to, again, have a good conversation on. Again, I touched on lighting, just like Nan, and I think the lights should be, visited, maybe shown on a larger scale. I think actually I did find foot candles on one of those large maps, but they're really kind of tight and can't.
Oh, okay,
They're very difficult to see, so maybe have that on a large. So we
right,
can see
okay,
it more
yep,
readily, but also that 12-foot height is key for trying to limit glare. You really, same thing on the landscaping, again, those are very linear, very monolithic, homogeneous, there's a giant straight line of any type of tree. It's a bad idea. It looks man-made, it doesn't do well for screening, it kind of draws attention. Hey, what's over there, right? There's big straight line of trees. Also opens you up for losing it, insect infestation, blights, anything that happens to attack that specific species, you lose the whole thing all at once.
Well,
Even
plus it's
age
soft
and
wood,
wingspan.
basically, right? So storms, trees coming
Could take them
down,
out.
we
yeah.
all see that constantly.
Sure, so just
So-
something the board may want to be looking at as we move forward, right? Is that or is that not acceptable to you? Do you want changes to it?
I just interject that usually when we do screening for, any kind of, not landscaping around the home, but screening for commercial, if we try in rural areas, try and attain more of a hedgerow look that has, multiple layers and a diversity of species. So that would be a much more naturalistic look than a straight line.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that photo you supplied was great.
Understory, understory, blends in like the rest of the landscape around the area. Food for thought. I did have some questions or comments on the stormwater. Wanted to specifically know if the DOT was aware of the infiltration basin so close to the road, if they're okay with it. Is there a road?
How does that usually work? I mean, what do they usually say about things like that?
I'm gonna imagine they're probably not gonna like it. I mean, the idea of an infiltration basin is the water comes in and it goes right out into the soil, right? And well draining soils and, groundwater recharge, it's a good thing. But do you want to do groundwater recharge adjacent to a road? Would be my question. If it's going to end up being in the roadside ditch or migrating under the road, potentially give you a freeze thaw issue, causes, potholes against the DOT's road. So it's ultimately their call. But it is something that, I guess should be looked at. And there was a question from one of the board members, I think, about the difference between bioretention and infiltration.
Yeah, I have that.
Yeah, so, bioretention is first and foremost a filtering practice. So it's planted and the water filters through, you have a certain soil medium. In the infiltration practice doesn't necessarily do that, but you just have really well drained soils. So you bring the water to it and into the ground, disappear. So it's just straight infiltration, no filtration.
So is that a typical thing to not have any other plant material in there?
I mean, it complies with the stormwater regulations for New York
So
State.
it's a collection,
Right,
but
so there's
not a
pre-treatment, there's different
filtering,
things.
not a.
It's not like a
cleaning.
bioretention would be.
But the bioretention has some pipes underneath so that that water is, what water does make it down to that base, then is
it's-
outflow.
Right, because
It's
it's
not
primarily a filtering practice.
But then where's it going
infiltrating.
on this plan? Where's it going after that?
I'd have to take another look to answer that
So
question.
it's not
Typically,
a,
you would go to like a recharge station.
It could go to any number of places ultimately, but, again, you can infiltrate it when you're done, or you can collect it and then discharge it to someplace, but again, it'd be you could discharge it to, a bunch of riprap, if you will, right? Dissipate the any energy that may be in that flow, and then just let it sheet flow into a recurring buffer and then into a wetland. That would be perfectly fine for the DEC, and you know, it wouldn't cause erosion or harm or anything like that. I mean, bioretention practices are something they want us to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I was kind of surprised that there was one bioretention, one infiltration, and why not two bioretention, especially this whole deal with being over the aquifer and, you know, these soils, this water, sounds like this water's gonna perk down pretty readily.
Again, I haven't seen the soil test results. I did have a comment about that, but again,
Okay.
generally speaking, if you're proposing infiltration, your soil test results must be very good.
Okay.
Otherwise you can't.
Most of that over there is all grass.
Yeah, so that's around there, it's a lot of that, oh, gravel.
So is the bioretention handling what they call the first flush? then?
We don't really use that term anymore.
Okay.
The DEC will slap us for that.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a water quality practice. Doesn't really deal with the quantity of its use as much, just quality. And again, it's a good practice. It's something they want us to do as much as possible. Then, like, just to kind of go back to the water issue again, I did review the water study and whatnot. So I guess the board probably has a lot more knowledge than I do in this surrounding area, this site. I mean, do we have a feel for the wells in the area? Does anyone know that, hey, this guy has 3 wells, this well over here is dry?
Did you get the report that was
Yep.
sent in?
The
I mean,
rural
it wasn't
water.
really a report, but a letter from, a comment from. the
I saw the comments. I also, like I say, took the time to read through Steve's report that he had done from rural water. So I mean, this specific site is in the better aquifer on the town. Basically, there's 2, and kind of we're one of the first sites in the good aquifer. But again, that's a large scale study, done for the town for general planning purposes. You're not supposed to do site design based on that. It's just making you aware of the factors that we should be looking at. And so I'm just wondering, in other words, does anybody have any reason to think that there is a problem with wells? Or maybe a problem with wells? If there is an issue in this area with wells, then we should definitely be looking at that under this review as far as setting up some sort of protocol to have a test well pumped, stress the aquifer, monitor the other wells around and see what happens.
I feel like that would be probably a really good idea.
Yeah.
Because you're introducing, is there 3 wells on site and the volume that could be withdrawn from those wells?
Again, the comments we're seeing from the public are indicating that there's issues.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying,
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
I see
I don't
those
know-
comments, I see this study, and then
Right, I don't know that any of us have, intimate knowledge of that, but obviously from the comments that we've
Mhm.
received,
Right.
there are concerns.
I know I've been, involved with certain locations and neighborhoods, and everyone has bad wells, right? This guy has 2 wells, this guy has 3 wells, you don't have enough. I used to live with a residence that had 2 gallons of it, it's not enough, it runs dry. So again, if that's the issue that we're having, people are already having low yields, then it's something we definitely look at.
So we request that, we request this study, and who does this?
Well, typically, just like everything else, anything that we need for the review, the applicant provides.
Yeah. So can we talk, maybe, are you done, George?
Sure.
Okay, so let's go back to your question about the big picture and see if I can tie together for you sort of where you're going on this, all right? So you have 2 responsibilities in connection with this application. You're the lead agency pursuant to seeker, which is a state statute. And the state requires that the seeker review take place at an early juncture in the review. And it'll take place in this review as it typically does in other reviews in the first part of the review. And then when you've completed or mostly completed your responsibilities under seeker, then you'll turn to reviewing the application pursuant to the requirements of your zoning law. And the idea behind that is that Seeker wants us, from a policy standpoint, to start looking at potential adverse environmental impacts at the beginning of the project. And it makes sense not only for the community, but also for the applicant, for us to be considering those kinds of elements of a proposed project now, so that changes can be made at the beginning of the project to mitigate those impacts. Seeker wants you as a lead agency to identify, look hard at the project, identify the significant adverse environmental impacts, and then require changes that be made of the project that minimize those impacts to the maximum extent practicable. Okay. And so that's the stage now that you're embarking upon, is the seeker stage. We're having the workshop here today. One of the things that we really wanted to do, an important reason for having this workshop, is there have been lots of people that have been able to talk and exchange ideas about this, but the planning board members haven't had a chance to talk about this at all, either in public or with each other, or have a back and forth with your consultants. So we wanted, that's part of the reason we wanted to be able to sit around the table today and have that discussion. The other purpose of this meeting is to set the stage for the next step in the seeker process. So as a lead agency, your first significant decision is making a determination of significance. And that's issuing either a positive declaration or a negative declaration. And so, as you know already, if you determine that a proposed project does not present a single significant adverse environmental impact, then you can issue a negative declaration. If you're not finding any impacts, you issue a neg dec, and the environmental review pursuant to seeker is over, and you move on to special permit and site plan requirements under your zoning law. If you do identify significant adverse environmental impacts, then you're in territory for issuing a positive declaration. And if you issue a positive declaration, then you will be asking the applicant to submit a draft environmental impact statement. And that is essentially, we're talking about issues today as we sit around, things that need more study, things that you need more information. The purpose of an environmental impact statement is to provide a structure for providing a lead agency with that kind of information. And you'll have, before the applicant actually gets sent away with the assignment of preparing the environmental impact statement, you will sit and we'll do what's called scoping. I don't know if you've done that before, but that's the process of identifying. You're basically setting out the table of contents for the environmental impact statement. Seeker doesn't want environmental review to be a waste. They don't want applicants to be just studying anything just for the heck of it. As a lead agency, you have a responsibility to focus the environmental impact statement on the significant adverse environmental impacts that you've identified, and that's what the applicant studies. That's what the content of the environmental impact statement is. So a process has been created to help you make that decision. And the first step in the process is for the applicant to submit an environmental assessment form, which gives you some basic, make sure that every lead agency in the state is getting the same information from an applicant. And it's a way to try to not only give guidance to lead agencies, but also so there's a level playing field with how the review gets conducted. And also to make sure that lead agencies consider everything. We've decided as a state that these are the things that we think are important that need to be thought about. And then the next step in that process is to take that EAF part 1 that you get from the applicant, and then you sit down and you'll have, Nan will give you later a copy of part 2 of the environmental assessment form. And as lead agency, it's your job to go through the questions on that form, which breaks down any particular project into a series of questions about what the potential impacts are. And then you have to answer based on what you know about the project, answer, what impacts are presented, and for the ones that are presented, you're also asked to grade the significance and or magnitude of those impacts. And after you go through part 2 of the EAF, what you have essentially in front of you is you will have made a list of, oh, there's no significant adverse. We ended up saying no, or small, small impact to everything. Or we've gone through the list and we've identified 5, 6 potential large impacts. And those are indicators that a positive declaration is in order for those things, or may be in order for those things. And an environmental impact statement would be likely. And those questions that you've answered large impact to, that's the beginnings of your scoping statement, where you've identified the things that need further study. I think one of the things that can be very useful about the process under a positive declaration is that it provides a structure by which you receive information from the applicant. I know that there's been some, I know that both from the consultant side and with the planning board member side, that there's been some difficulty in trying to put everything together when you're getting new pieces of information from the applicant, over time in steps, and it can be hard to synthesize the whole. And that's something that, we may be looking to avoid as we go forward to make this review a little bit easier. But one of the advantages of environmental impact statement is that everything will come to you in one integrated document that can be reviewed all at once. And it provides a structure. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I think I've seen many instances where I think it's been a more efficient method for both the applicant and for the board for that system to be followed. And you get everything at once, your draft environmental, then it'll be up to you to review that draft environmental impact statement and make sure it's complete and satisfactory as far as you're concerned, satisfactory so that you can open the floor, because SEQR requires that you have a public hearing on the draft environmental impact statement. And it's also not only a unified presentation of what the studies are, because remember, the environmental impact statement will have 2 elements to it. It's going to study the issues that have been identified by you in the beginning of the process, but it's also going to contain proposals by the applicant. Okay, here's the issue. We studied this. This is what we found. Here's what we're proposing to mitigate the impact that you identified. So it takes you through study and a proposed solution. And I think that's helpful for you as a board. I also think that it's something that can make public comment a little bit easier, because you have one-stop shopping for all the documents, and you have an integrated document, and you're able to, as an applicant, you're able to go back and forth, because impacts often don't exist in a silo. They have, they have a primary impact, but they can bleed into other impacts, and a single presentation allows you to weave a little bit more back and forth in between different impacts. So getting back to what we're doing now, so you should talk to each other, but what our plan for you is that after you have a roundtable today, one of the things that we're suggesting is we're going to give you all a part 2 of the EAF to take home with you after the meeting. And the plan is that at another meeting, you're going to start going through the environmental assessment form. And our recommendation is that the question to be answered is, with regard to information that you don't have already, does it make more sense to ask the applicant to submit additional material for you to look at this time? Or does it make more sense to go through the part 2 of the environmental assessment form, get a sense? We happen to think, I don't know, Nan and I talked about this, so I'm saying she can correct me if I'm saying something she doesn't agree with, but we happen to think that if you go through the EAF Part 2 and you get a sense, you're going to get a very good sense of where you're going to be going on this project with regard to whether you think this is going to be a pos deck or a neg deck. If you're close, you see some things, you think, well, you know, it could be a negative declaration here. If we had some more information, we'd have a greater comfort level about saying, because there are instances where applicants can do that mitigation at this stage of the game, make a change, do something to address the issues, and then you can get to a point where you can comfortably say they've been addressed, and we can say there's a neg deck here. If you think that you go through the EAF Part 2 and you end up identifying 6 or 7 potential large impacts, then you really know that it's very likely that you're going to be issuing a positive declaration. And then there may not be any utility in asking the applicant to submit additional information. What you can do is set forth your scope. You can include the request for additional information in your scope and get it all at once, which is, you know, then you're not wasting the applicant's money by having them submit the same information twice or take 2 cuts of the same issue. So so that's why we want you to be able to talk amongst yourselves. We want you to be able to think about the EAF Part 2 and then go through the EAF Part 2 once. If you're missing information that you think you can't even answer the questions on the EAF Part 2, then you're going to have to ask for more information. But I think you need to go through that EAF Part 2 once to see where you're going, see where the process is taking you, and to see where you're falling on some of these things. And then I think the path forward, ask for more information or go straight to a determination of significance, is going to be much clearer after you have the opportunity to do that. So I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah. John, I agree about 100%.
John, you're saying when we deal with this set of documents, though, we don't accept anything
Correct.
new?
Yes, for now. Yeah, the door is not closed to ask for more. But I think, you know, this is, I think you're just at a time, you know, where we've seen a lot of information about this application. We haven't really gotten down to brass tacks on seeker. I mean, the determination of significance, EAF Part 2 is it's the beginning of the process. We have to start getting into that, and you need to be thinking in seeker terms, because we have to get there and get going, whether, you know, it's going to be a pos deck or a neg deck. We have to go through that.
Let me just make a point
process.
of information. Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman. Just for the benefit too, I mean, the applicant has not just submitted an EAF, there's a full wealth of information and studies that have been done as a supplement to that EAF. Traffic studies, stormwater reports.
Understood.
other materials, so that it's not just that form, all the materials that are before the board are considered in part of that review, so the consultant's comments and all of that. And the applicant has been working with comments from the last meeting. We agreed not to submit additional information in advance of tonight, so as to have a productive discussion, so that the board could have a productive discussion with its consultants. But the applicant has already been working in additional modifications to the plan because we've heard your comments and we want to work those things in. Some of the things that were discussed tonight, like the ag data statement, have already been submitted. Some of those components are there. So we do have a lot of that information. So we want to make sure that what has been presented or what's there is fully considered when it's part of that review, because again, much of the EAF process, this project is type 1 by about 0.1 acres on the classification list. We're not trying to get around any secret hurdles by any stretch. In fact, we're submitting all of the materials to support why this project or what we've done to mitigate it. So I just want to be clear that the EIS process is a very expensive and significant undertaking. So tonight it may sound like and in respect to John, it's a significant process. The applicant is providing you the materials to help show that the project is already mitigating potentially significant environmental impacts. So just that process, this review environmental process, the applicant can do these things. I think Mr. Lyons mentioned this evening in advance of making those determinations. For example, an offsite well testing, if that's something that the board saw fit, we propose to do that rather than a formal review process in the EIS, which for the most part, may include the same information you already have. Traffic report, other mitigations, depending on what this board determined might have those impacts. So just, I felt like it was appropriate just to present that, and I appreciate you giving us a chance to.
And that's totally understood. I think the position we want to be at this point is, in order to move this process forward, I think I agree with council, we need to do this part 2 of the
Yes.
EAF and then move forward from there. Otherwise, we're gonna have to keep having this give and take. We're gonna ask you for something, you're gonna get back to us, we're not gonna like it, or we want another comment, we're gonna go back and forth, and we're just gonna prolong this process. And I don't think we want to do that. So I think, I concur with council.
Yeah, and I think, I understand Mr. Palmer's comments, and, you know, realistically, you know, I know, I mean, he's not wrong that the environmental impact statement can be expensive, although there is an expense to, you know, repeated submissions as well, but the fact of the matter is, as a board, you have to really, you just have to call it straight, look at the EAF part 2 and decide what you need. You know, is this a pos deck or a neg deck for you? As lead agency, just fulfill your responsibility, whatever that is. And everything that's been submitted so far is on the table to be considered as part of that process.
And I would just add that, I think there's a real usefulness in going through the part 2, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And it forces, when you have to answer a question, it forces you to, you know, really look at the plans and all of the submittals. It may bring up other questions that we haven't even entertained yet. So I think as, you know, we're always in seeker looking for that determination, whether it's negative or positive, but I think the part 2 in and of itself, because of the questions that it asks you to review and answer, is an important part of the review, because it'll identify other information needs. It'll, you know, force you to go back to the site plan and look at whatever. So I think that, you know, seeker gets complicated and sometimes it gets overwhelming, like, you know, all these steps, but you know, if we take it one, part 2 is meant to lead to the determination. So I don't think we should leap into, is it a neg deck or a pos deck now? But I think that the part going through the exercise of part 2 not only is required, but it's critical. It's a critical part of your review to really, you know, get that understanding of the project.
Well, it'll force us to evaluate the submittal as presented.
Right.
So any of the ancillary documents that have been presented to us
Yeah,
will
it
become germane. to
it
the-
puts a structure on the way you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
Which can be important, you know.
So I mean, I know some of the planning board members had other questions. I mean, I still feel like, you know, we haven't really
Things unsaid.
things
Yeah.
unsaid. I think, you know, we need to have a discussion. I mean, George and I both went through these things pretty at a high level, you know, what issues, questions, concerns.
And
do
we
you-
envision to this session, not just questions, if you have opinions or things to say, you know, whatever it is that you want to share with the other planning board members, share with the consultants, now is the time to have that dialogue.
And Aaron, I think, you know, some of those concerns you've gotten, some of those questions, you know, now's the time to.
I think the first big overview look at this is that these are permanent structures, they're houses. And there's, if we were to do any other kind of a larger scale development like this, we would go into our open space planning. And I'm wondering, it seems to me that question is a very beginning thing, because it would really change the whole structure, the site plan. And whether, because if this retreat fails, what are other uses that it could be in their houses? And it becomes a development that is it all on one lot? Is that allowable use? Can it be subdivided into individual lots with single houses on them? Then it becomes a road. So do we have to look at it as, what else could it be if this business use doesn't work? So if it was a, you know, would be a more of a cluster development, kind of thing,
Mhm.
instead of all spread out along this road.
Yeah, I think that that's a valid point, and I think the what would be the plans for future development in the event this does fail? Because then there are separate lots there.
Or not even fail, but they want to sell it.
Or, right, exactly.
Right, so.
Well, there are gonna be limits on how far you can go down that road,
Mhm.
because you're not really allowed to be looking at, I mean, there have been some comments that have been raised, so, that's one that's also been raised by some members of the public, and, you know, the applicant's financial capability to do the project and all that, and those things are just not in your jurisdiction, so I think that, I want today's discussion to be we just throw everything out and we will sort things as we go along, because I think it's important to just exchange whatever ideas anybody has today. But I think that's something probably that is gonna end up not being in our basket for this review.
I have a question regarding a business plan. Is that something that the board can request?
Probably
seeing?
not, probably not.
Probably not.
Actually, no.
No,
The only thing that's, and it's not really a business plan, but the site plan does in the list of submittals, there is a requirement for project costs. But that's not really a business plan
Right.
per se.
still.
You're really in a position where you have to take the applicant's word for it, that they have the financial capability to do it. And even, you know, in many cases, applicants aren't sure themselves, you know, whether a particular venture is going to be successful or not. You can't really know that at this juncture. I mean, I understand why people are thinking about that sort of thing, because it is in terms of just thinking about the future and where things go. The only thing is that there may be things that can be, if you get to the point of issuing approval for this project, you can make clear in your approval that what you're approving is this project and you're not approving something else, you know, that it could morph into later. So you approve something, there are 4 corners to that approval. And then if the applicant decides to change, sell, do something different, they're gonna have to come back. If it looks like there's under seeker, and the principle of segmentation says that we don't want to be putting projects through the environmental review process in little pieces to try to make the impacts smaller. So if, you know, I don't have the sense that that's happening here, but if that were to be happening, then you could start thinking about, you know, what's the wider plan, because as a lead agency, it's your responsibility to really take a look at, you know, at the whole thing. So you have more, Erin, I know.
So this might be like a nitpicky thing, but the whole thing about lot 4 not being used, so it's not part of the retreat at all. There's no talk about that. The acreage of it is included in the EAF that they started filling out for the.
Sure.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be. It's like you included that acreage on lot 4 into the project, so if it's not part of it,
The lot line shift, so the lot line does shift.
it's the total amount of lot 4 acreage that's shown on the plan is included in the total number of the acreage that you have listed.
Right, and that's just because there's an adjustment to the lot line with lot 4. So while it's not part of the, I mean, I'll speak to the.
Part of the
Yeah, it's because they're doing a lot line adjustment at the same time, so they included that acreage. Because so there's really 2 things going on. There's the special use permit. And then there's a lot line adjustment, so.
So you include the whole acreage of 4, even though it's not part of
Because it's
it.
part of the action that seeker's speaking to.
Okay,
And then there's the follow-up question about, you know, how much land do you own, right, in that whole area, right?
Right.
Surrounding and whatnot, so you get a feel for everything that the applicant has as a holding.
This doesn't show that, but that later, as far as those numbers and what that is. Okay. The, one of the things that Nan had written up about the farming impacts, and so the, to get more information on what could possibly be the impact of farming. I think this whole thing about the water use, I think, is one of the concerns too, for local farmers that are also withdrawing water out of the same aquifer. And, but whether we ask, in our zoning law, it says that we can request an advisory opinion from Columbia County Farmland Protection Board, Columbia County Soil and Water District, New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. So, you know, whether, or do we just ask the local farmers? You know, I mean, it doesn't look like there's an impact, but I don't know. I'm not a farmer, so other than water, what else could impact them? One of the other things was the, which, man, you had shown us, we did new maps for the stream buffers that included the upland slopes. And so what's on the plan is just that 100-foot measurement, but it's not taking into consideration that expanded buffer. One of the septic systems between Creek House 1 and A-Frame 2 is really set very low down. It's not in the 100-foot buffer, but it would be included in the buffer in that slope. So I think we need to kind of review, because to overlay that map that you had given us, a lot of this property is sloping down towards that stream.
Right, and you know, and that brings up a good point in terms of the existing conditions map. That goes back to why that map is so important, because that buffer should be put on that map.
That pink, the upland buffer.
The right, the stream buffer that is in the zoning.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It wasn't clear to me if areas of disturbance are really shown on the plan. All the utilities, underground, electric, where it's coming in, and so that sometimes I know I see site plans and it really like hatch out all the areas of disturbance, so we can really kind of look and see where it is on the plan. I mean, you know, obviously we can see some of it, but to get a better view of that to help us understand all that. So to the stormwater stuff. And is it adequate? Do you see it as adequate? You're reviewed and say, yeah, this looks great, or yeah, it needs work, or.
Well, I didn't do what I would call the quote deep dive. I guess I'd have to go back to look at that to answer that question. I mean, conceptually, it's not insane. I guess, I've had others that I've looked at, like, what are you kidding? It's not like that, of course. Like I said, they have fire retention, they have the infiltration basin. I'd like to see the soil testing for that. They did provide all their computations. I would like to see the worksheets, but again, I'm sure they have them filled out. That's how you fill out your NOI, which was included. Yeah, so I mean, I can't honestly say, give it 2 thumbs up. I didn't do that close of a review of it.
Will that be happening? Or we,
I can.
I
I
mean, I don't know.
usually
I
wait
mean,
and let the board tell me what they want, what level of review they think they need. I mean, I knew we were speaking to seeker, so I was really looking more to seeker type of review, more so than a technical review. I mean, it is a DEC permit, just so everyone understands. So it's similar to like, your Part 5 for your water or your septic permit. Typically, you don't have the planning board engineer look at what the health department's going to review and issue from the DEC is going to review, right? So again, for seeker, we have to look at it for the agency. feel there's a reason why I should be looking deeper, then I guess I'd have to say, you'd have to give me a directive.
Yeah, that's really under the purview of the health department and DEC.
And the stormwater is also a DEC. So like I said, if you want me to do more than just a seeker kind of review of it, I would have to actually tell me to do that.
So as far as the poor soil and the septic fields and the aquifer, that's the Department of Health and the DEC that are gonna look at all that?
Septic design itself would be DEC and health department, depending on the use, the flow, et cetera. One or the other or both. And again, they would look at the soils. What I had asked for in my correspondence was that we get copies of everything that they're submitting. So again, we see, we know what it is, and we're sure we know there's a septic, what is it? It's not the same as me reviewing it and checking it and saying, well, I'm looking at this per grid, I need to go see your deep test pit. Let me check your math and make sure you've got the right, length of laterals here, and oh, you have a pump, let me check all those counts, and that's not typically something, because someone else is doing that, the permitting agency is doing that.
So, and at what stage does that take place?
Usually concurrently, as
Okay.
you move through the process, you submit to the DOT, the DEC, the Department of Health. Some agencies won't look at it until a secret determination has been made. Others will look. Columbia County generally will look. DOT sometimes won't. Other, DEC sometimes won't. They'll say, "Where's your seeker? You don't have seeker yet." Okay, call us back when you do.
But isn't the issue like, because if some of those are needing to be moved around and efficient, then the site plan
It creates a
in the
problem.
seeker,
If they tell you-
yeah, so
If they
it's,
tell you to change it, I've had projects, with the DOT is the one that I harp on the most, if they're the most common one to do it to you. They'll say, we're not reviewing it until you have a secret determination, and then so you make a determination, you're moving forward, and then the DOT says, yeah, we don't like that, just move it. Oh, you're kidding me. Now you're back in front of the board saying, hey, I hope you don't think this is a significant change, the DOT is forcing us to move this. And if it is, you open up the public hearing again, So I wish they would all just do it at the same time. Like I say, Health Department, Columbia County is very good at usually providing timely comments for the board, so you don't get caught in this loop.
Well, and the applicant too.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me that the water, whether it's well yield or the septic, I mean, that's critical to all of this.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
So,
I understand, but again, on a seeker standpoint, from strictly speaking from a seeker scenario, if you have septics that are going to be permitted from the DEC or the health department, the presumption is that it meets the code or they wouldn't give you the permit. If it meets the code, there is no significant impact to the water aquifer
now,
due to
what
that septic.
exactly does meet the code?
In other words, the state of New York, Columbia County Health Department, right, wherever the agencies, they have rules and regulations that are in place so that, the engineers, it's kind of funny, we go to school and learn all this stuff, we never get to use any of it. We cook out of a cookbook, and the state says, I don't care what you learn, this is the way you're doing it. It's very uniform, right? Nobody can come in with a different answer. So they look at it that way, and the reason they set it up that way is because they've got, a certain amount of, like for septics, it's not just getting rid of the water, you're not just infiltrating, you're treating the biologics in the water. So you're doing organic loading and hydraulic loading, and they come up with a methodology that we have to follow to size it. If you follow that methodology, presumably everything's fine. That's why I said the laundry is going to potentially be an issue.
So like
Not
different
normal
fields that
sewage
they would
waste.
ask for.
So
that's
then
an
they would
example
ask
of
for
that?
additional information, and they may come right out and just say, no, you're not going to do laundry. Depending on whether or not we can address their concerns. We don't have that level of detail at this point. Similar with the stormwater, there's certain things that they're looking to take out of the water. And if you follow the stormwater manual and you do it according to the state regs, it will work.
Okay,
If you don't,
okay.
you're creating a lot of heartache for yourself as an engineer, because now the DEC is going to take a really deep look at it. They're going to check your science, check your math, see if they agree with your design. Take a very long time. At the end of the day, they say, yeah, we don't like it. Go back and do it over.
Drainage question. I can follow the flows through the site till I get to the parking lot and the exit. I can't see where that water is going. I don't know if you've looked at that. Is it something DOT is gonna be
DOT is gonna be concerned about water coming out onto their roadway,
Right.
yes.
That's what I thought, and then it's running freely down the driveway.
And
as
that's
far
why I was
as I
wondering if
can
they
tell.
had, any, again, comments or correspondence from any of these agencies, because that would help us.
And can you tell all the impervious surface that's created by the inn, the patio, is that going into the retention system under the parking lot, or we don't know?
Didn't look at it that closely yet. There is a
Yeah, we-
retention system. We can-
is pervious, it's pervious pavers.
But we have roof and stuff, can we see where the water's going? Yeah, that's drainage for me.
Anything else?
Aaron, you done?
I think they had traffic questions, right? Didn't you-
What you wrote up?
Yeah.
Well, this, I don't know if this is something that the planning board does, but I'll say it because I live on Route 82 for 31 years. And my house is set back about 800 feet. It's noisy. There's a lot of traffic sound. And I sat one day in the driveway for an hour and I counted 16 semi trucks. This was in the middle of the afternoon on a Thursday. They could have turned right or left on 7 down in the hamlet, but likely didn't. So that's going to be an impact for the retreat. I think it's noisy. It just is. And if you're close to 82, it's definitely. So just to comment from my experience living here.
I know one of the questions earlier in the state was the traffic study that was done that they did was in 2020, I believe. We've had
Before the
significant,
pandemic.
yes, we
Yeah.
have, I would say a third more, maybe almost
Yeah.
double
Right.
traffic.
Yeah, well, I counted 62 cars, 16 semi trucks. And I forget, did I say here, and then I put vans and pickups in another category. in there, 20. So that's busy. And that was a Thursday afternoon. So, we don't know, it's way worse. They may have less semi trucks, but.
Yeah.
And night is pretty quiet, but early in the morning, I have a dog who goes out sometimes 4 in the morning. And the trucks are going, so it's loud at that point, and it kind of echoes. So, I mean, I love my property and I'm set back far enough, but it's definitely a factor. Right? We're waiting hopefully to have the the speed limit lowered to 35 for a longer stretch, because the hamlet's suffering. That's going on a year at the DOT at this point, so who knows?
I
But
think we did discuss for grade elevations from Route 82 across the road, the view of what we would see for the neighbors on that stretch. And the height of those A-frames, we asked about to be able to draw the scale that we would get a picture from the road of driving by or across, the
yeah,
neighbors across would see. I think we
Right,
discussed that.
and then my memo brings that up, is that the zoning does authorize the planning board to ask for a traffic study, visual impact study. And, yeah, they did provide traffic information. It was not by putting a traffic counter out on the road, though. So it's using available data that may or may not be accurate anymore. And
They did use the DOT data, and they did use the traffic projections, and even though the DOT data that they collect and put out is showing a decrease in traffic, they actually used a 1% growth rate.
okay,
Creighton Manning did. So when they did I didn't take issue with their traffic analysis, and it shows a level of service of A.
Yeah, I think that's
So that's-
2020 data.
Well, they had like 2020 data, 2019 data, but then they did have a section where they discussed the future traffic volumes. And the DOT collects this for a multitude of reasons, and the traffic is going down. And so they're using a growth rate, bringing it up. They're not using what the DOT says about going down. So they're being conservative in their analysis.
Yeah, but
The
our
only reason I
growth-
bring it
our
up is
growth
from an
rate
engineering
at
standpoint.
the-
It's a level service at A.
Okay.
Even if it dropped to a B, it's still not significant. impact. So I'm just
Our
saying,
growth
just
rate
not to get
started
caught in the weeds.
pre-COVID and went through the roof because now everybody is basically, so moved here,
Mhm.
use these homes here, many not returning to them from a home office
Sure.
now. So our, just living here and being here every day, we all know that our traffic is just went unbelievable.
Right.
I think the thing about when you say something's significant and the standards that maybe the state is using for maybe a more urban area, when you come to our little town and our weird little intersections,
Yeah.
it is significant
It
to our
is,
town.
yes, for us, yes.
Traffic is similar to sound. It's very subjective.
Get into
I like to explain it this way, and some people get offended, so please don't. Everybody hears, so everyone thinks they're a sound expert. Everybody drives, so everyone thinks they're a traffic expert. And the fact of the matter is when you have to sit there and you wait longer to leave, even if it's a second, it's annoying. It is, trust me, 2 seconds, you're really getting angry. It is not under seeker a significant environmental impact. That's why they have these processes that we have to follow, and they have a level of service. And that's why I'm saying this is level of services A, which is great. But if you wanted to be conservative, so let's say they somehow drop it to a B, I don't see how that could happen from an engineering standpoint. But even if they did, under seeker standards, that's still not significant.
But wait,
You would be very annoyed by it, trust me.
I just have to interject
But it
though,
wouldn't
that from a solid traffic import, you know, going from an A to a B, it's still gonna move the traffic through fine. But I guess I respectfully disagree in one area, and that is that one of the things that seeker looks at is impacts to community character. And traffic, while it may not be a technical issue in terms of a traffic impact, it may be a change that impacts community character. So it's not just the technical, in my opinion, it's not just the technical numbers of, you know, now you're gonna have 70 cars and it's not a significant increase. It's how that is perceived and what the, you have to take it into context of everything else. So I just want to interject that these things aren't always just cut and dry, that the numbers say it's great, but we have to look at all of these things, you know, in how they interact and comprehensively. So
And that's an example of the point I was trying to make earlier about the fact that there are impacts that cut across different areas, and you know, that's a good example of one.
What is some of like the documentation that we could use to support something like that, like a way to not quantify, but things that we could point to kind of support a change in the community character that could support our, you know, why we would make that decision.
well, community character is, a lot of people think community character is just aesthetics. It's not just aesthetics. Community character is kind of the whole of the built and the unbuilt environment. And, you know, I think if you go back and look at the comprehensive plan that Ankrum has put a lot of time and effort into defining rural character. There's a definition in both the comprehensive plan and in the zoning. So I think the comprehensive plan and the vision and the picture that it paints of what and defines for what community character is certainly a place to start. Some of these things are not measurable in terms of numbers. And that's why you guys going through part 2 and thinking about, you know, how you feel would be a change. You have to weigh these things, and you know, there's not a cut and dry, here's the number, you know, here's how you define community character. There is a subjective aspect to community character. The visual impact, you know, that also can be subjective, but there are tools that we can look at so that you can visualize it better than just a piece of paper. So photo simulations and other kind of models can help you have a better idea of what that will be like. I mean, we've done lots of work, you know, we've done trainings and talked about photo simulations. You've done photo simulations for other projects and required them. I think they're very helpful to show current conditions and even progression as landscaping changes. This is what it'll look like at 5 years. This will be what it'll look like at 10 years. So
This is what it'll look like at night.
yeah, this will, so that there are tools out there for you, because right now you can say, oh, I think that's really great, or oh, I think that's really bad. But having a tool that really helps you visualize those things gives you more of something concrete than just, oh, I think it's a great idea, or I think it's not gonna work. So I think that's where, you know, these other tools may come into play.
And you can speak to this in more detail than I can, but the EAF workbooks also provide guidance to lead agencies in trying to, so the idea is to bring as much objectivity as we can. There's an understanding that the reason that the lead agency's been chosen to be the local board most of the time is there's a recognition that nobody knows your town as well as you do. But there are a lot of thought has been given to, and Nan will talk later about, you know, figuring out magnitude and being able to make judgments about the intangibles. You know, how can we do that? There are tools, and the EAF workbooks can be very helpful with regard to that.
If I might make one point of information, Mr. Chairman, the application before you is a use that was put into the zoning district for this, the property is classified as this use. It is a special permit use, comprehensive, the zoning has to be in conformance with your comprehensive plan. So this use is a specially permitted use on this property. That name special permit often is a misnomer. It's tantamount to a permitted use. It has to meet the requirements that Nan and Mr. Lyons mentioned this evening. So a use that meets those, the highest court in New York, Court of Appeal, has determined that a special permit use is tantamount to a permitted use. It just has special regulations. So I want to highlight that this use was an advent of a plan, of your master plan, that was created, and it's a specially permitted use on the site.
But you're doing seeker, you know, we're taking seeker on first. You'll be looking at special use permit requirements later.
Right.
Right. So you guys are gonna walk us through.
Yes.
Yeah.
We were talking about truck traffic, just to go back to that. Does our code require a loading zone?
A what?
A loading zone?
And there's a
You're gonna
section
get-
about loading zones in there. I don't know if it requires a loading zone unless the use requires
The
one.
restaurant's gonna get deliveries, and Cisco and Ginsburg are famous for showing up in tractor trailers to deliver to cases. I don't know if the turning radiuses and the curves and the slopes can handle a tractor trailer, but I don't think there's any way to prevent it from coming in. So can we look at the curves? The T intersection seems to fall, and the same thing with I guess this is the fire truck turnaround. Can we put a fire truck on there, see if it works?
Well, that's something the chief is here now, and David, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look at this in detail, but,
Actually, I have not received a copy of this,
of the revised plan,
of the revised plan. We got the original plan, but the fire district, fire company has not received any of the new plans, so I really don't have a lot of comment to make on things other than turning radiuses, everything that you've talked about, transient occupancy, dwellings and different things. It's all clearly delineated in New York State fire code. So there's places to go to get all of this information to make it work for us. It's just, that's what works out.
well, if you get an opportunity at some point in time, just take a closer look at this and
Okay.
Is it- give us any comments that you might have.
Sure.
But I think, John, that brings up a good point in that I believe the fire department was an interested agency when we
They did
first sent
receive,
the
yeah.
coordinated review letter out. So all of those folks should be receiving, at least you can correct me if I'm wrong,
No,
but
you're
all
right,
of them,
you're
the board, the involved and interested agencies should receive the updated package, so they have it. So it's not just like, yeah, come in and take a look at it. We really should make sure they get a package.
We're also pleased to meet directly with if the board sees fit, the applicant has previously met, again, on the prior iteration of the plans, but again, please to also meet directly with the fire department and go through, logistics. We had discussions about pull-offs and other things on the prior iterations when we were dealing with the ridge. Of course, this is a significantly reduced development proposal, nothing on the ridge. We completely shrunk the whole proposal that's before you, so we'd be happy to speak. If the board sees appropriate, we'd have that communication with the fire department as well.
Any other questions?
George, you'll look at the traffic for the trailer, the tractor trailer, where we can unload and that kind of stuff. And the dumpster is not screened, it's right across from the patio. which Seems a little awkward. And then we didn't talk about,
One-way flow, that's why.
we didn't talk about the pool, but I know you had comments about the pool. I mean, you gotta show the pool fence, say this is a commercial pool, not a residential pool. We need details on the depth, because if it's 4 feet or less, it needs a handicap lift. The equipment has to go someplace, it doesn't show it, so.
Fencing.
Fencing, yeah, the fencing and the style of fencing. There was a whole bunch of hot tubs on the last plan, I don't see any here, if they're all gone, so be it, if they're not. And they're deeper than 2 feet, they're swimming pools also.
Also, the tents, you were gonna explain that to us, how the plumbing is gonna work. And
What
kind of plumbing are we
talking about?
pardon me?
What kind of plumbing are we talking about?
That's the question.
Last time we met, you said they were gonna have toilets in plumbing bathrooms in the tents.
There will be bathrooms
Okay, so how does all that work? I mean, when you take the tent down because it's winter, where do the facilities go? I mean,
It's
how?
not, I mean, it's a tent, but it's more of a hard structure type tent.
So is it staying up year round?
Well, it can, it depends. Depends on which ones you go.
There
are two different types of
scenarios.
Do you want us to present the structures? Because we can.
No,
I'm just
no,
curious
not
if
right
this
now.
is somehow-
No, we don't do that right now.
We
But
understand the question, we can, see, this kind of goes to Mr. Lyon's point about what materials we can provide to you. That question came up at the last meeting, and we have already prepared sort of the narrative that goes to this. That could, because again, the question came up, okay, when the tent comes down, where do these facilities go? I don't know which board member or which consultant brought it up, but those are the types of things that came up, and those are the things that.
yeah, and I don't think those particular items are necessary for us to have for the sequel review of part 2, because it doesn't matter what the
Not gonna create
materials
a
are.
significant environmental.
Correct. So I don't think we need that right now, and I don't think we want that before we see.
Got it. But it is,
Yeah.
if we plan to have.
Right, all these little questions and details will go in that second phase when we do the zoning
Yeah,
law
again,
after
that-
seeker, so.
Right.
That's correct.
I mean, we got pages of little things everywhere, you
We have
know,
a
that,
lighting plan that's supposed to be, dark sky compliant, like there are components that are there, but if a parking space shifts, or the patio moves, or we shift them, all those things that are on it are also going to shift, so it's, we're trying to give.
Yeah, all the
Scale examples of what.
All the details will come out and be shaken out as we proceed through the public hearing process. I think
Yeah.
the whole idea right now is for us to get a good enough understanding of where we are with this presentation, this initial proposal, so that we can do the part 2.
I think sharing some of the details amongst yourselves is good, just so that you can see what your fellow board members are thinking about and things that you're.
But we don't even get to a
concerned about,
dialogue.
Right, but then we'll use that EAF part 2 to start
Yeah.
focusing our thinking.
Right.
I think the only other thing I really just wanted to kind of, Nan and George both brought up the, like some of the planting details and that, I gotta say that infiltration basin, it looks very commercial. So that idea of riprap swells or is there things to make it look less commercial? And I think that was the whole idea, the retreat, the blend in and look, and so the stormwater system seems industrial. And so it's good that it's gonna do a good job and it's sized well, but is there ways maybe instead of one big infiltration? Can it be
Smaller.
smaller, less deep? And could they be planted? Could they blend in better or something like that? So I think that kind of design overview of, you know, being able to really screen this. And so anything that's screened, I mean, seen off the road 82, that it doesn't look like these big empty basins that you see at the mall kind of thing.
Yeah. Understood, absolutely.
And definitely the linearity of the plan definitely looks very man-made. It's not very,
Commercial looking.
yeah, it looks very commercial.
Like creates its own abstraction.
Right, that's the first thing that I thought about with it, whereas diversifying it with species, height, everything, and also having something that is green all year round, mixing conifers in there would be great, because the cottonwoods are deciduous.
Exactly.
We would recommend the board too. We do have our model up too, that kind of goes to help give a visual representation. Sometimes that can be hard to see on the plan. And just so you, I mean, I'm not gonna say we can jump to that and present that, but for the board, we're gonna have that here for you to look at. You know, it does try and give you another representation of the layering or the, you know, the diversity that's being created by this landscaping plan. Again, screen from the highway, screen from adjoining properties, and again, screen the uses, using the topography also to help do that as well.
I'm excited, they are trying to encourage pollinators. It's a
Yeah.
good thing, it's a good thing, right?
Anyone got anything else?
That's the first phase, just about.
I don't know how the board feels, but I'm concerned that there's no control at the entrance. And I know I'm a nosy guy. You're gonna get a lot of sightseers in here, and it's gonna, who knows what, quadruple the traffic. People are gonna be nosy and wanna come in here.
You're not allowed in, Joe.
Well, who's gonna stop it?
Well, I did have that question too, is that at some point we really need to learn how that whole system works. Like, if you're coming to stay or go into the restaurant, you have to drive all the way through. And then the signage, that's for sure, like, you know, to direct that traffic, like you check in, and then if you want to go back to your campground, you have to go out on 82 and back around to your tent site kind of thing, if you check in at the inn or whatever. So that's just that we need to understand that flow and how it actually works when people arrive and leave, and deliveries and all that.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything else? Julie? Bobby? Ellen? Yeah. All right.
Anything from you, John?
No, I've had my input. This is all you guys. So I guess at this stage, we can, Nan, you have something?
Yeah, I
Okay.
wanted to hand out and take just a couple minutes to go over the EAF.
That's where I was gonna go next.
Okay, then I thought maybe you were ending the meeting.
No, that's
Okay,
where I was
sorry.
going.
Okay.
I was moving that far.
Okay, sorry. So what's coming around is a copy of the part 2 form. I made 10 copies, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there should be enough. Sorry, we don't have enough. We have one. So I guess to start off with is I hope that between now and whenever the next meeting is, I ask you to review this and think about the questions and come prepared with your thoughts about them. To go through this EAF when you haven't given it any thought ahead of time is a very long process. So this is really one where each of you that, you know, you can fill it out on your own and be prepared with your thoughts to make a productive meeting. The other thing is I've asked Jay, so there's a lot of tools on DEC's website to help you through these forms. And so I emailed Jay this morning the kind of introduction to the part two. I'm gonna go over it briefly now, but the PDF that I sent you has on the third page are hyperlinks to, so this is like a general overview, but the guide or the workbook that goes along with this EAF. So as you're working at these at home and you say, I don't really know what that question asks, you can click on any of these hyperlinks for any of these questions. And that hyperlink then will go to DEC's website and take you to a whole lot of information on what the question means, what do the words mean, what are some examples, what questions do you ask yourself to even come to an answer of these questions. So I really urge you to not just like, oh, no, or whatever, but to really look at some of there's a lot of information that are provided for each one of these questions to help you understand, the ins and outs of what it's asking in the examples. There's examples to say, like in the traffic section, there's a whole discussion about, what constitutes a traffic impact and how do you determine that? So you shouldn't, as you're going through this and thinking about it, you shouldn't feel like, I don't know what that means, or I don't even know what the word means. So there's lots of tools. So Jay's gonna email this to everybody tomorrow. So you all have gone through the short or the full the short EAF multiple times before. For a full environmental assessment form part two, it's similar, but much more detailed and covers a wider variety of topics in depth. So it's the purpose of this part two is to identify whether there are impacts and to try and start thinking about, do you feel that they are small or no impact or small impact or large impact, medium or large impact? Because, and that's a real difference. So we're not at this stage, we're not asking ourselves, is something significant or not? We're asking, is there an impact? And so the first thing you should think of as you're going through these questions is go through and think about, is there an impact? And you could you say, oh, it has no bearing on this project whatsoever, and it's a no. You could say, yeah, I think it might have an impact. And then you have to start thinking about what kind of magnitude of that is. And that is significant because when we move on to the next part, which is part three, it's really only those items that are identified as moderate to large that get further evaluated in the part three of the EAF. So, and you have to look at it as there are lots of projects, and there's lots of places where there's projects that go in that do have impacts. They might be a series of many small impacts. There might be some moderate to large impacts. But that doesn't mean in the end that it's a no at the end. It means that the purpose of this is to, first of all, try and mitigate them or avoid those impacts. But the part three will lead you through the analysis of whether those are significant impacts. So try as you're going through this to really focus on if you think there's an impact, and then the size of the impact. So we look at, and this is where your understanding of the community as a whole goes back to your question about the traffic, is that it's all in the scale, in the context. So 50 additional cars in area A may not be seen as an impact at all, but 50 cars in area B, because of the context that it's in, may have an impact. So you can't ignore the context in which you're doing this review in. So it's both scale in terms of the size and intensity of the project, and scale in the intensity is measured by not just what's on the ground, how many buildings, but it's also how many people are coming and going, how many cars are coming and going, how much noise, how much light, all of those things get at intensity. So you could have a really big project that has for, 2 employees, like we did something up with the Air Force up in Oneida County. It's this huge building, but they have 3 employees and it basically sits there and there's 1 car that goes in. So it's big, but it's not a very intense use. So you have to think about the scale, the intensity of use and the context. And I think the context is going to be really helpful in that it's not even the context of the whole town. It could be the context of that section of 82 or of the hamlet. So you have to really put those into perspective. So when you get this little sheet, read through it, it goes through all of these. And the seeker, the workbooks also give you guidance as to, well, people say all the time, well, how do I know if it's a moderate impact or a large impact? And some of these things may be able to be measured, some of these may be are more objective. There is a difference in, like I can tell you, like a small impact is considered an impact that is minor in magnitude and that has a small or a limited area of effect. So, you're gonna dig a ditch, it's gonna impact some small area, but is that significant? How wide of an area does that affect? And so small impacts include those that are generally considered negligible and minor. Some impacts are temporary, during construction, and then things settle down, they're planted, and they're no longer an impact. Like sometimes noise is an impact that we have during construction. And then once the construction is done, that kind of noise goes away. Moderate impacts ratchet up a scale, they're moderate in magnitude, and they have more impact on more environmental resources. And they tend to affect a larger area of acreage. And may go beyond the parcel. So we're looking at, like I said, the context is there's impacts potential to the parcel. There's impacts to the area around the parcel. There's potential impacts to the broader town and region that goes into thinking about what that context is. Moderate impacts are also longer lasting. And so you might have like a big impact that really is, the 20 days they're out there digging. And you might decide that it's a large impact, but it's not very significant because it's temporary. So the moderate impacts tend to be longer lasting and have a broader scale that they're impacting. And the large impact, we kind of ratchet it up when we go from moderate to now we're really talking about impacts that have a severe magnitude. They cover large areas. They're long lasting. They may be permanent kind of impacts, and that it also are ones that are harder to mitigate. That you might have something that permanently destroys some sort of significant habitat that once it's gone, it's gone. So that kind of time frame. So we have to look at scale, the context, the time frame, the opportunities for mitigation. All of that will weigh in on both your decision about whether something has a small, a no impact or a small impact, a large, a moderate or large impact. And then when you get to part 3, you'll be asking how significant are those impacts? And you might have a small impact an impact that is a small area that just cannot be mitigated. And it might be some important resource that elevates that. So there's not a cut and dry, small, medium, large. You have to kind of put your, comprehensive hat on and look at all of these things together. So And it's not always cut and dry. And so that's where I think if you can individually think through these things, look, if you need to look at the website tools to help you, that's great. But then when you come together, you know, and I've sat here and, you know, you've gone through that before where you have good discussions about, is it small, is it large, why is it small, why is it large? So I think that you've had those discussions when you've used the short forms. So I think that I guess I would urge you to, for our next meeting, not jump to, is this going to be a significant impact and we need to do a positive debt, but to really concentrate on the questions that they're asking you by topic, and that it's all split out by impacts on land, impacts on water, impacts on wildlife, impacts on open space and recreation, community character. There's a question in here that will ask you, how consistent is this with the comprehensive plan? So you might want to refamiliarize yourself with, you know, some of the vision and the goals that are in the comprehensive plan. And that will cue you up for part 3, which is where you make a decision about what it all means.
And I think the only thing I would add to that is it's not just checking the box, but it's also assembling what your reasoning is when, you know, what's the basis for you making that decision to check the box? Because what part 3 is the discussion of those reasons. In part 3, you're gonna have to set forth what your reasons are. This is a significant impact. This is the reasons why we determined this to be a significant impact.
Right. And so when we go through this, whenever the next meeting is, you know, that's where we want to create a really good record of the discussion to back up whatever decision you choose on these. So we can build that record and that discussion, and we can go back and say, oh, these are all the reasons why these items were checked moderate or large. And then we'll build on those and evaluate them for significance.
And our vision is that George and Ann will be present at your next meeting to be able to help you, in addition to the other resources that are at your disposal as you go through. They can answer questions, or Ann and George can bring their experience to bear in helping you put context on things.
Something I'll add to that, because I've gone through part 2s before. Sometimes I find, and it depends on how you think and how it works for you, but I actually pull it up online because it's really easy to link to those questions right from the online part 2. It's just like this, and it's all linked. So then it goes right to that question and all, you know, how to quantify that moderate, small. I just find that easier. I don't know if someone else.
Anything to make it easier, except this is
Yeah.
daunting.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
It
looking
is.
at
Well,
things like,
it
is
is.
it the depth to water table? How do we know?
Well, some of that information, you have to look at the part 1
Yeah.
information that gives you some of that information.
To be on the air.
But Colleen, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think my experience has been doing it that way, which I think is a really good idea. So what happens is, as you're going through it, you start to begin the pattern of how to look at things ends up starting to really take root in the way that you're thinking about things as you're going along, because it creates a consistency of approach as you're going through the questions.
And you may have to refer to, as you're going through the questions, you should be referring to the site plan and all the other information that supports this to help you answer those questions. The EAF and all of the information, that's what the part 1 is, to provide you with information on depth of water table and, you know, sizes of
Basics.
the basics, right?
You know where they're boring or test pits on the site? Do you have any information? I haven't seen it.
What's this?
I don't know.
It's probably taken off of the source.
Just a point of information, John, is there as far as that meeting, there should be, well, we respectfully request the opportunity to be able to respond if there are items that come out of that meeting that could be potentially mitigated through a number of avenues. I don't think we'd ask the board not be making any sort of determination at that particular meeting, especially where a lot of this can be, again, addressed by the applicant through a supplemental submission. Again, EIS,
Well, if I'm not mistaken, there won't be determination made at that point anyway. It's just a case of filling out part two. There will be a guide for us to proceed.
I think what I would recommend to you is that after you've gone through part two again, that's the time to revisit that question about whether it makes sense to which path to take, asking for some additional information or whether, you know, that's not going to help you make decisions about answering these questions.
Right.
Any questions about the process or the?
Can I call you when I'm in the middle of it?
Anytime.
Yes.
I'd call Nan though.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions?
if not, Mr. Chairman, we also, if we could give you like a 30-second presentation on this after the board's done with its deliberations, just so that when the whole, because I think we're gonna need this.
When you say next meeting, you don't mean next.
No.
meeting.
I don't know, yeah, I think we're gonna.
We're gonna discuss that now.
Okay.
What we're gonna be doing is, no, this is not coming up in a regular.
Okay.
There will be a special meeting just for this. Okay. Jay, did you have an opportunity to poll everybody on?
I know that I have a quorum for April 20th. Ann will be present, John will be present, George can also be present. So that works for at least the applicants council.
Yes.
Yep.
What time is that?
7.
7?
Yeah, we're not going to be present, and we want to submit questions or things that we find that it
Yeah.
would be good just to email it to the board.
Sure.
Or
Absolutely.
Email
Oh,
to
yeah.
Jay.
Yes.
Read it.
Aaron, are you available on 20?
Okay.
Are you available on 20?
Yes, I am. I'm putting it on my calendar right now.
Yeah, I should be.
Bobby? Okay, Joe's available. Connor,
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, I
No.
can. Yeah.
are you available? You may not be.
I feel that way.
Yeah, I might need that. I'm
Day by day.
Yeah, I'm gonna be away also.
Especially after the last two.
Yeah, so let's to get it right then, it will be April 20th, Jay. All right, at 7 o'clock. Everybody's good with that? And it'll be for the sole purpose of completing the part 2.
Be great if we could have the same setup again for that meeting.
Phil, no problem with that?
No, good.
Okay,
Can I get a motion? on
Yep.
the date?
yeah, motion for the special meeting. Bobby,
Second.
Jimmy, all in favor? Opposed, carried. If there's nothing else, then I'll move to close
I
the.
have just a little bit more. Can I get authorization to work with the applicant's team to do another circulation?
Motion?
What does it mean, circulation?
For the secret.
To know informational.
Right.
Just send the revised plan around
Yes.
the interest of each.
Motion made, Bobby, second, Aaron,
Yes.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, carried.
Mr. Chairman, just before the board closes, would you care for just a 30-second primer on what you're looking at so that it makes sense from a cool green?
If you want us to leave it here, we'll leave it in.
We can put it there.
Okay.
Conference room, and then we'll take that over.
Go ahead. No, thank you, Brian Quinn, want to make sure. We make a lot of noise because, well, the layperson, which of course none of you are, a plan is very difficult to read. Whereas when you bring topography and space and alignment into things, it's much easier to understand. This, very briefly, the bright green trees you see are deciduous trees, the dark green are evergreen trees. We urge you to look at this conceptually. I've heard a lot of talk about different species. Consider it interchangeable, whether it ends up being a cottonwood tree or a maple tree. You know, that's open. We chose cottonwoods because they grow quickly and have a really interesting form. But you know, this is a conceptual plan here that we hope really conveys the idea of the project. I think can you see? We also have a few sections that we made to convey really the relatively small size of the proposed structures in relation to Route 82. Again, that's a subjective statement, I said relatively small, but I urge you to consider when you look at the scenic impact of these structures, the type of topography that's out there on the site, that there's actually little landforms that we've tried to nest buildings within to minimize that, to minimize sound travel. Along with those lines, I also have a really nice bird's eye aerial photograph for you to review, to see how this land kind of, it's kind of like all land in Columbia Park. It's an undulating landscape. It's not as simple as just a straight line that you see across as you drive. I also have a really simple model I did this morning. These are, yes, a linear, there's no real straight lines in the plan, but there are linear forms of the plan. Yes, they do have, it's difficult to screen when you look straight on. However, the viewer, especially from a car, which is how most people will perceive the site, rarely looks straight through trees. If you start to turn it, you have much more coverage. You have a much different way. So you can imagine yourself as a car or a person walking down the road, imagine looking through it, how the view changes. We have a great key here for you to explain everything on the plan. For example, exposed corrugated cardboard is naturalized meadow. That would be like waste to chest high meadow of goldenrod, aster, blue stem, all sorts of overseeded things. We have hayfield, which is this bleached out green color. That's just as the land is now. Of course, this is off the side, but we maintain a lot of hayfield along the road. The Miyawaki forest, I know there were some questions about what that is, but you could just imagine a very dense forest planting. Miyawaki forest is just a way to cause trees to grow faster, get rid of fixed carbon, trying to get to close to carbon neutral as possible with the project. So these are all like laid out on the plan. I don't mean to hijack the meeting with the model, but we put a lot of time into it to try to convey the concepts behind the landscape. We don't want you to think we're coming to this with just a very simple bulldozer approach to the landscape. It's very thought out, very custom to the landform and to the land itself, with great respect to the agrarian nature that I know the comprehensive plan has asked for, and to the ecological community, which the comprehensive plan has shown commitment to as well. Thank you.
What's the scale of your mark?
80 scale. 80 scale.
80 scale?
Yeah, so
So if I take a scale and put it on your landscape buffer, that's the landscape we were gonna see day one?
No. Not again. This is-
Okay. Doesn't do it for me then, sorry.
This is depicted.
It's a nice wall hanging.
Typically in, if you excuse me, typically in a plan, we look about 5 to 10 years in the future for the mature design to happen. However, we will certainly create graphics for you to understand on day one how this will work. And I totally get that concern, but I want to say that with landscape, it's a very slow process. And there needs to be a little bit of a room for growth. However, not to minimize the importance to screen it in day one, but we expect that.
Right, because of the temporary nature, again, how temporary those can be considered too. So yeah, we want to make sure that this wasn't just in a vacuum here for aesthetics. It is done with a scale and objective in mind. To give you all visual representations. You know, more mentioned tonight, there are other ways to do that, OSIMs, et cetera. But this is a certain way also to try and visualize it.
And it's accurate to the most recently submitted plan, so they can key them together.
Are the trees that are shown to scale?
Yes, approximately.
For 10 years down the road.
Exactly.
Well, I'm looking at the existing vegetation.
Yeah, and then, for the existing vegetation, that's to scale.
Okay.
Yeah, that's, I mean, we didn't go out and survey every single tree, but this is approximately a 50-foot canopy. You know, existing, which is also a really interesting thing to consider, how these existing tree rows, you know, impact the view already as you drive through and kind of like absorb the nature of what we're proposing.
Well, that goes back to my comments on the existing conditions map, because it doesn't clearly identify all the hedgerows. There was a question about whether the trees along Route 82 were still on the site plan, whether they were going to be kept or not kept. So that's why that, you know, some of the things that are shown on here, I don't think are, you know, really conveyed well in the existing site plan.
Yeah, that was a AutoCAD glitch, so that turned off. That's basically what matters. We'll certainly provide more elevations on it. There are elevations on the contours. They're all the way on the south end and maybe on the north end. provide more of that. We'll put a limited disturbance on it. And the reason why I took the aerial pole off of it is it was causing problems with printing. It was blowing things up. I did prepare a plan tonight that sort of talk towards your comment with regard to that. So I'm working on something that I would rather provide that as an exhibit, because once you start putting improvements shown on an existing conditions plan, it's not really an existing conditions plan anymore. So my question would that be something that we could provide as an exhibit and not really part of the plan set? 'Cause it's not something we ever really built from anything.
I guess that would be up to the planning board to decide how it would want to handle that. Yeah, I mean,
An exhibit is fine. I mean, the key is you get the
Just to get the
information
information.
that's conveyed by the.
and some of the sheets have a lot of stuff on it. So it might be that you might want to, like take the lighting stuff off and just make its own sheet.
We'll try,
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question before we close. So is the planning board going to ask for that well test?
No, right now,
That's an open
that's
question.
open
That's gonna
question.
stay open.
Let's see what the results are from part two. Anyone else? All right, I'll take a motion to close. Motion made, second. All right, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. See everybody on the 20th.
Next week.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Nobody told you that, huh?